When I arrived in New York with $100 in my pocket and a family ring on my finger, I had no friends, no connections, and no margin for error. Only one thing: character. In Italy, we are taught, if you want to be a king, first learn to clean the boots of those who are already sitting on the throne. I started from scratch, learned to bend when necessary and take the blow when the time comes. 10 years later, I had a business, money, influence. I ate at the best restaurants, shook hands with the right people. And next to him was a woman who seemed like a gift from fate, beautiful, sophisticated, from a family where surnames mean more than people. I put my soul into it. But here's the trick, friend. If a woman betrays you, that's one thing. If she does this to someone who shakes your hand and looks you in the eyes, it's already a war. In Italy, only saints forgive treason, and I'm not a saint. So sit back, pour yourself something stronger. Now I will tell you how the Italian takes revenge beautifully. When I remember my hometown on the Tuscan coast, a warm and slightly faded picture emerges before my eyes. Narrow streets flooded with sunlight reflected from pale yellow walls and bright red-tiled roofs. I was born into a family that kept traditions. My father is an unquestioned authority and support. My mother is a sensitive mentor and caretaker of the home. We lived in a low stone house, surrounded by a garden with orange and lemon trees. As a child, when I ran barefoot around the yard, I could not imagine that one day I would go so far, leave everything familiar behind, and go to America to make my deepest dream come true. But the story of my dreams is also the story of my father. Even before I was born, he worked in his uncle's small family restaurant. There he worked his way up from a simple kitchen assistant to a head cook, and then a co-owner. His name is Giuliano, and for me he has always been a model of honesty, kindness, and hard work. When I was a teenager, my father and I talked about how to move forward with our lives. He always wanted me to continue the family business. You might think that we are talking about inheriting a business. It seems logical, right? But no, our restaurant remained a tiny establishment, with barely enough space for 2 or 3 tables outside and several tables in the main hall inside. The profit was small, and the father often sighed as he counted the coins at the end of the day, but he still did not give up his culinary experiments and caring attitude towards guests. He loved life, loved family, and cooked with such passion that his dishes seemed like magic to me. My father died when I was 22. I just managed to graduate from a local university where I studied the basics of business, more precisely, not a university, but a college of economics. In our city, everyone called it simply the School of Accountants, but there you could get at least some basic knowledge in finance, management, and marketing. My father fell seriously ill and passed away quickly, too quickly. His passing left a deep wound in my heart, and with it a burning desire to continue his work and prove that my father's dreams of a good, honest, and cozy restaurant can live forever. I saw with what enthusiasm he spoke about the kitchen and how important it is to be able to please people. It always seemed to me that he wanted more than he had then. Perhaps he wanted to expand the restaurant, make it more famous, and bring guests there not only from neighboring neighborhoods, but also from other cities. But our family did not have enough funds and opportunities. However, I knew that if I ever had the chance to realize my potential, I would do it in memory of my father. And then one evening after the funeral, left alone in the kitchen with my mother, I quietly said, "I need to go to America. I have to try." She silently lowered her gaze and then stroked my hand and nodded, saying, "If this is your path, go. I believe in you, and I know your father would approve too." My departure was not easy. When you leave your hometown, hundreds of questions begin to flash through your head. Am I doing the right thing? What's next? Will I be able to achieve anything? How will my mother be here alone? I remember going into her bedroom on the last day before the trip. She took out an old box from the closet. It contained newspaper clippings, some old black and white photographs of our family restaurant, and a tiny medallion on a chain. She handed me this chain and said that my father bought it for my 18th birthday, but he never dared to give it to me. He was waiting for a special moment when he was sure I was ready to accept the family tradition in some new, broader sense. That day, I, a 23-year-old guy, stood in the middle of the room with a small chain in my hand, and tears came to my eyes. On the one hand, I was proud that I was taking a step forward, ready to fulfill my dream, to continue my father's work, but on a different level, on a different scale. On the other hand, I had a strong feeling that I was leaving behind everything that was dear to me. The house in which I grew up, the grave of my father, friends, and of course, Italy itself, with its landscapes, cuisine, and the character of the people. On the day of departure, I came to the seashore and looked at the horizon for a long time. The waves rolled onto the sand, leaving slightly foamy patterns, and seemed to be calling me to follow them. I remembered how my father took me fishing as a little boy and how we sailed on his old boat into the distance, where the shores were not visible. My father then said, "Lorenzo, the main thing is not to be afraid. There is always a shore to which you can land, even if it is not visible." I repeated these words, sitting on a suitcase by the ship's ramp, and felt as if my father himself was now standing next to me. When the farewell whistle sounded, I turned around and saw a small group of mourners. Mom, my cousins, and several neighbors. A small but closest circle of people who believed in me. Mom squeezed my hand tightly, and her eyes were full of maternal love and sadness. "Come back when you can, son, and know, we are always waiting for you," she whispered. And that's how I left Italy, with pain, hope, and my father's chain around my neck. After several transfers, a long journey, and endless hours on the road, I finally set foot on American soil. New York, a city that I knew only from films and short stories from a distant relative who had lived here for 20 years. I was met by a frantic rhythm, bustle of the streets, an impossible mixture of cultures and languages. I knew only basic phrases in English, and even those were at school level. The first step was to find housing. I remembered my cousin Francesco, who once left for the States and settled in Brooklyn. Of course, we were not particularly close. We only saw each other a couple of times in our lives, back when I was a child, but I decided that it was worth trying to contact him. I found his address on an old envelope from my mother in Italy and took the metro to the desired station. I was surprised to realize that Brooklyn turned out to be much larger and more confusing than I had imagined. The streets here were not as narrow as the houses, but they had their own, no less impressive chaos. Francesco greeted me warily. He himself had been married for a long time, had 3 children, and, frankly speaking, lived quite modestly. He rented a small apartment in a building where every square meter was worth its weight in gold. Nevertheless, he invited me into the living room and treated me to a cup of coffee. His wife, Gina, smiled, although it seemed to me that she was not too happy about another mouth in their cramped home. When I revealed my story, said that I had come to look for work and planned to settle down here at least for a while, Francesco thoughtfully scratched his chin. "Lorenzo," he said slowly, trying to speak as clearly as possible, and, most importantly, in Italian, "you understand that you will have to start, roughly speaking, from the very bottom. Here in America, it doesn't matter what you had in your homeland. If you do not have an education confirmed by OS diploma and no connections, many doors are closed." I nodded. I knew that a difficult path awaited me. But that didn't scare me. I was ready to work as hard as I could. My father always said, "Don't be afraid of work, only be afraid of inaction." "Uncle, tell me, maybe there is some kind of work, even in the kitchen or in delivery. I'm not afraid of any work, just to start earning money. Let me think." Francesco looked at his wife. She seemed to want to say something, but remained silent. "I have a friend who runs a restaurant in Little Italy. Maybe he needs someone to help him." I agreed without hesitation. This is how my American story began, with a tiny position as a busboy in a restaurant, where the owner, a stern Sicilian named Giorgio, looked down on me slightly, as if checking whether I was too soft to withstand the rhythm of New York everyday life. I stayed with Francesco for 1 week. I really didn't want to embarrass his family. Yes, and I needed to quickly become independent. I found a website that one of the restaurant's visitors showed me, having learned that I was looking for housing, on it a room in an area where mainly Hispanics lived. The room was very tiny, a narrow single bed, a bedside table, and a cabinet. The window looked out onto the brick wall of a neighboring building. But even for such happiness, I paid almost half of my salary. Working as a waiter turned out to be difficult. My language was weak, orders were confused, and often clients asked again, and I, blushing, tried not to show my confusion. The owner, Giorgio, saw my efforts, but at first he clearly treated me as an errand boy. I carried heavy boxes with bottles of wine, ran to the store for groceries, and helped clean the hall after closing. And of course, I tried to smile at clients as soon as I had the opportunity to serve them. In the evenings, returning to my room, I felt how much my legs and back hurt. But I reminded myself why I started all this. I remembered my father's smile and his determination. I saw before my eyes that same small restaurant in Tuscany and our old family house standing under the orange trees. And then my strength seemed to be revived. I understood that this was only the beginning of the journey, that the real tests were yet to come. It may seem like a lot of people speak Italian in New York City, especially in the Little Italy area. But this is not entirely true. Short phrases and cliché expressions like how are you, or good morning, sir, owned by many, but in reality, the business communicates in English. Documents, email, calls from suppliers, all this required full command of the language. Realizing this, I signed up for evening English classes at the public library. The classes were free, and people came from all over the world. Chinese, Mexicans, Poles, everyone, like me, wanted to learn the language in order to get a better job. Classes were held twice a week, but in addition, every evening I read adapted articles in newspapers and tried to watch American TV series without translation. I had one more trick. When the restaurant closed, I asked permission to stay and revised the menu in English. I tried to say each ingredient out loud to remember the names in English. I soon noticed that I could, at the very least, communicate with Americans on the phone and asked less often when they placed an order. This, of course, was just the beginning, but I felt like I was moving forward. Even Giorgio, who at first looked at me with condemnation, now began to sometimes show signs of affection. From time to time, he gave me advice on how to work with clients correctly and did not so often scold me for mistakes in orders. After 6 months of my work as a waiter in a restaurant, the moment came when one of the managers left for family reasons. Giorgio called me into his office. I entered, feeling how everything inside me was shrinking with excitement, because usually the owner spoke to me only in a raised tone. But this time he was calm. "Listen, Lorenzo," he began, "I now need a person who will monitor the staff, meet suppliers, keep order in the kitchen and in the hall. You, well, sort of, take things seriously. I see that you are learning the language, that you are trying to understand our wine lists. In general, do you want to try to become a temporary manager until I find a replacement?" This sounded like a challenge and a gift from fate to me. Being a manager meant more hours, more responsibility, and possibly a higher salary. I understood. Here it is, a chance to prove myself. I nodded and tried to answer as confidently as possible. "Yes, Signor Giorgio, I'm ready. Thank you for believing in me." Then I began to seriously learn the basics of the restaurant business. I started reading articles about management, trying to understand the financial side of the work, studying the supplier database, and analyzing how the price of food is determined. Of course, I was wrong, but to my surprise, Giorgio no longer scolded me, but, on the contrary, explained how to do it correctly. He said, "If you want to become a real boss, learn to count every penny, and also understand the most important thing is a satisfied client." I remembered how my father treated his guests, how he knew everyone by name and remembered their preferences. This was my real service school. Soon I felt quite tolerable in the role of a manager, solved everyday issues, controlled the work schedule of waiters and cooks, and communicated with the accounting department. And of course, I began to think, what if? If sooner or later I opened something of my own, where can I cook dishes that would definitely please both Italians and Americans, and in general any person who loves good food? Thoughts about my own business did not give me rest. But I understood, opening a restaurant is not easy. We need serious investments. We need a business plan. We need a team. And is it really enough to just take out a loan and hope that the business will work out? It seemed to me that I still needed to become a little belonger in this city to form a contact base. And then one day, while flipping through the newspaper, I came across an article about the growing demand in the United States for quality imported wines, especially Italian ones. The article stated that the market is still not saturated, and new suppliers are trying to break through with original brands, while large distributors deal mainly with well-known brands. It seemed to me that it dawned on me. After all, my family knows firsthand about Italian wine. Uncle Antonio had a small winery near Tuscany, and my father at one time tried to negotiate the supply of his wine to a neighboring city, but did not have time to expand this idea. I thought, what if I tried importing Italian wines to New York? Not in large quantities all at once, but little by little, to establish connections with small restaurants, shops, bars where authentic taste is valued. At first, the idea seemed too bold. But on the other hand, I've been a manager in a restaurant for 6 months now. I know the suppliers, I know how alcohol is purchased, what the licensing procedure is. I had a good reputation with Giorgio, and if he had agreed to take at least one batch for testing, that would have already been the first step. And I started planning how to find capital, how to organize supplies, how to pull it all off while remaining employed. I understood that official registration, documents, and permits were needed. America is a country of bureaucracy, and this is especially noticeable in the wine business. But I wasn't afraid. I saw that I could very well start with a small batch. I'll take some wine from Uncle Antonio in Italy and explain my idea to him. If the idea works, I will expand. The launch took place a year later. During this time, I studied everything I could, read articles on the internet, signed up for paid online courses on the wine business, consulted with sommeliers who came to our restaurant. The owner, Giorgio, at first didn't even know that I was up to something there. I only said that I wanted to better understand wine in order to improve sales in the restaurant. Having saved up a small amount and also borrowed from Uncle Francesco and borrowed from one of his colleagues, oddly enough, he offered me money at a small percentage. He apparently had his own entrepreneurial spirit. I purchased the first small batch, literally a few boxes of wine from Antonio. My old friend from Brooklyn, who worked in a small transport company and knew how to process cargo from Europe without unnecessary delays, helped with logistics. When the bottles arrived in New York, I was truly excited. It was as if I was expecting the birth of a child, and this is truly the birth of something important in my life. Realizing that I needed to somehow advertise the wine, I decided to arrange a small tasting at Giorgio's restaurant. Of course, I had to get his permission first. I plucked up courage, came to him, and told him about my idea. "Have you already launched your business?" he asked in surprise, raising his eyebrows. "Giorgio, I didn't want to tell you until I was sure that everything would work out. But then, the other day, a party arrived. If you are interested, let's try it together and offer it to the guests. I'm sure they will love it, because this is real Tuscan wine from a small family producer." "Okay," he answered reluctantly, but he had a curious look. The tasting went better than I could have dreamed. First, I gave the wine to the chef and sommelier from the hall. We had a part-time guy who knew about wines. Then we invited several regular customers. Everyone liked the unusually rich, but at the same time soft taste, and the story about a small Tuscan winery gave the wine a special romance. Giorgio ordered several cases for the restaurant, and then, at my request, made recommendations to his friends from other restaurants in Little Italy. This is how the first sales began. Of course, there was little profit. All the money went to cover transportation costs, fees, taxes, and certification. But at least I realized that there is a demand. And most importantly, I learned to interact with American clients. I realized that they are interested in knowing about the origin of the wine, about the family that produces it, about the traditions of the region where it comes from. I started preparing small booklets where I described Antonio's winery, added photographs of Tuscan landscapes, and told a family legend associated with the recipe. Of course, the difficulties of the startup were not long in coming. It turned out that you need to carefully monitor the transportation temperature, otherwise some of the wine may spoil. It was necessary to expand the line to cater to different tastes, and this again required money, which I had in short supply. I continued to work as a manager for Giorgio, and in the evenings I worked on correspondence and documents. It was a crazy race, but I wasn't complaining because I felt like I was doing the most important climb of my life. After another year and a half of my efforts in the restaurant business, I finally decided to take the next step, open my own establishment. This moment was not spontaneous. I saved for a long time, looked for investors, convinced them, wrote business plans, talked with potential partners. I also convinced Uncle Antonio, who saw the prospect of developing wine sales through my future restaurant. I also convinced several colleagues who were ready to invest small savings in my endeavor. The name came naturally, La Dolce Vita. For me, this is not just a reference to the famous film by Federico Fellini. This is rather a metaphor for the sweet life that we are all looking for when coming to America. Not in the sense that everything will be easy and simple, but rather in the fact that if you work, don't give up, and retain some of your sincerity, then in the end you can get a sweet result, that very dolce vita. I rented a small space in an area that was not yet super expensive, but was already starting to develop. The renovation took 3 months, and almost all my savings were saved money. I tried to recreate the comfort of my native Italy there. Light walls, wooden tables decorated in Tuscan style, photographs of Italian landscapes, bottles of our family wines on the shelves, and soft Italian music in the background. When everything was ready, I held a grand opening. Friends came, those who supported me financially came, even the employees of Giorgio's restaurant came. Giorgio himself, however, did not come, but passed a short note through one of the waiters. "Good luck, Lorenzo, you deserve your chance." It touched me. From the very first days of work, I realized that opening a restaurant is only half the battle. The most difficult thing is to attract customers and gain their trust. I walked around nearby offices, handed out flyers, negotiated partnership promotions with neighboring businesses, called familiar bloggers. Yes, by that time I already understood a little about the power of social networks and invited the local press to try our cuisine. In the kitchen, I relied on traditional Italian dishes with an emphasis on homemade taste. Handmade pasta, sauces that we cooked for 3 to 4 hours, authentic Tuscan bruschetta, seafood risotto, and of course, our signature wines from our native places. Of course, it was not without difficulties. The advertising budget was tiny, so few people knew about us at first. We had to fight for every guest. I changed chefs a couple of times at the start. Not everyone was ready to invest their souls for a small salary, compared to elite restaurants. But I tried to pay them as much as I could and treat them humanely. It seemed to me that if we were like a family, then the food would be family, homemade, and people really value this. Gradually, lovers of Italian cuisine and people from Europe began to come to us, who wanted to find a piece of homeland in America. More and more regular customers began to appear who appreciated our warm atmosphere and calm atmosphere. We did not claim the status of hot cuisine, but we always tried to maintain quality. I often went into the hall, greeted the guests, asked if they liked everything, talked about this or that wine, and gave a compliment from the establishment in the form of a small appetizer. Gradually, reviews began to appear on the internet. People wrote that La Dolce Vita is a place where you feel at home. Warm words lifted our spirits and motivated us to work even harder on our reputation. We began to attract guests not only through food, but also through events. We organized evenings of Italian opera, invited local musicians, held wine tastings, and talked about their history. All this required enormous dedication. I got up in the dark, went to the market, selected fresh products, then rushed to the restaurant, checked how the dishes were being prepared, met guests, helped the waiters, and in the evening, after closing, sat down to do the accounting and plan further steps. Sometimes I didn't see my wife and children. Yes, by that time I had already met Maria, also an Italian, who worked in New York at a travel agency, and we managed to get married and have 2 children for several days, except in the early morning, when they were still sleeping or late in the evening when they were already asleep. But despite the fatigue, there was always a feeling inside me that I was doing the right thing, that my dream, which grew out of childhood memories of my father's little Tuscan restaurant, has finally become a reality. La Dolce Vita became for me not just a business, but a kind of monument to it. When it's especially difficult for me, I imagine that he is standing somewhere nearby, smiling and saying, "I'm proud of you, son." I can't help but mention the people without whom my story could have turned out completely differently. First of all, this is my mother. Her quiet support from Italy, endless letters, where she proudly wrote that everyone in the city was saying, "Our Lorenzo was shown in the newspaper," or "Our Lorenzo opened a restaurant in America." She never demanded that I go back, but always encouraged me, saying that I was going my own way. Secondly, Uncle Francesco, who sheltered me in the very first days when I was confused and did not know who to turn to. He may not have been able to help me financially, but he gave me a roof over my head and several valuable contacts that helped me get a job with Giorgio. Thirdly, Giorgio himself, despite his tough character and sometimes harsh attitude, he became a kind of mentor for me. He taught me not only how to properly run a restaurant, but also made me understand one important thing. In this business, there is a place for both kindness and rigor. You need to be able to control the situation, otherwise the New York restaurant world will crush you. And of course, Antonio is the uncle from whom I started buying wine. Thanks to my efforts, his winery also received new clients. We began to communicate very closely, and now our family is a real bridge between Tuscany and New York. This is how I began my ascent from a tiny dream to honor the memory of my father and show the world that same Italian soul to a real business, which, although it did not bring millions, brought respect, prosperity, and the most important thing is a sense of self-realization. If you asked me what it cost, I would answer, everything. My nerves, my time, my strength. But if they asked me if I had any regrets, I would shake my head. After all, when I stand at the entrance to La Dolce Vita, meeting old and new guests, when I see someone smilingly trying my pasta or our Tuscan wine and saying, "Oh, how delicious," I understand it was worth trying for this. I think that everyone who has ever lived in New York has noticed one thing. This city not only never sleeps, but also always invites you to new events, acquaintances, meetings that you would never have guessed about if you lived, say, in a quiet town. It would seem that I continued to lead the everyday life of the owner of a small Italian restaurant, La Dolce Vita, in one of the city districts. But New York manages to quietly extend its hand to you, leading you down completely unpredictable paths. That evening, I had a charity event on my calendar to raise funds for the foundation to fight childhood diseases. It all took place in a spacious loft in Manhattan, and I was invited by a friend, James. He sometimes helped me advertise the restaurant and brought his friends to La Dolce Vita. In return, I gave him discounts or gave him the opportunity to hold private parties with us. So, James was organizing the buffet for this event and asked me to help. He knew that my capre, bruschetta, and appetizers would go perfectly with Italian wine, and Italian appetizers almost always cause a positive response in such fashionable parties. I couldn't refuse. Firstly, I'm always happy to help friends, and secondly, such events are a great chance to introduce myself to a new public. I have long had thoughts that I need to expand my circle of clients, and where else can I meet so many people from high society if not at charity events? They gather their large businessmen, representatives of the arts, socialites, and simply wealthy New Yorkers who want to emphasize their social activity. I spent the whole day running around the markets, selecting the freshest products, and arranging for the delivery of wine from my Italian supplier. I'll admit, I'm incredibly tired, but it was still necessary to have time to change clothes in order to somehow correspond to the luxurious surroundings. After lunch, I closed the restaurant early, handed things over to the manager, and went home to change into a classic suit. Black trousers, white shirt, skinny tie, and also grabbed a jacket. My father would have laughed if he saw me in such a dressy uniform, because in our family restaurant in Tuscany, No one ever dressed like that, at most a clean white shirt on holidays. But New York is a different reality. By 5 in the evening, I was already in the loft. A huge room with high ceilings and panoramic windows overlooking sparkling skyscrapers. The final stage of preparation was underway in the hall. Waiters were setting up tables, decorators were hanging beautiful bouquets, and everything was sparkling with lights and gold details. People in elegant outfits flashed here and there. I admit, I felt a little uneasy. I felt like a village boy who had accidentally wandered into the royal palace. But one thought consoled me. I am not here for small talk, but to present my treats. James ran up to me, shook my hand, said that I had high hopes, and asked me to sit down with some appetizers in the buffet area. I quickly unpacked the containers, arranged the plates, laid out different types of bruschetta, crostini, sun-dried tomatoes, cheese, olives, everything that we do well at La Dolce Vita. Then he asked the waiters to carefully carry it around the hall, offering it to the guests. About half an hour after the opening, visitors began to flock. It was clear that these were rich, status people, men in perfectly fitting suits, women in luxurious dresses and diamonds. The aroma of expensive perfume hung in the air, and the guest speeches were interspersed with the names of prestigious colleges, resorts, and yachts. I tried to remain modest, but with a smile, and when they asked me who prepared the appetizers, I introduced myself. My name is Lorenzo. I come from Italy, the owner of the restaurant La Dolce Vita. Nice to meet you. And you know, I even liked this game of being a stylish businessman, which I had not felt like myself until recently. I saw interest in the eyes of some of the guests. It was new to them that this was not just catering, but a restaurant with its own Italian owner, who personally prepares the food. And then at one moment I noticed her, a tall blonde who was standing at a table with charity lotteries and talking to some respectable man. The white dress looked as if she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine, but there was more to her than just beauty. She looked, how should I say, radiant. It seemed to me that she was a little bored in this crowd and looked around curiously, as if looking for someone to talk to, not about the latest deals on Wall Street or about the increase in stock prices, but about something human. I felt a slight vibration inside, that same excitement when you want to, but are a little scared to come up and speak. Frankly, I'm not a master at flirting. But then fate literally collided with us. She noticed my waiter handing her a plate of appetizers, and looking at him with a smile, took a couple of steps in my direction, asking, "Did you cook this?" I just managed to move to the side and also found myself nearby. I decided to take the chance. "Good evening." "Yes, these are my snacks," I said with a smile. "My name is Lorenzo. I am the owner of the restaurant La Dolce Vita." She smiled back. Her smile was warmer than I expected from a person of her status and appearance. An elegant hand, well-groomed, with a French manicure, and a thin bracelet flashed on her wrist when she handed me a business card. "It's very nice to meet you. I'm Amanda Marshall. Great food, by the way. Amazingly delicious." We started talking. It turned out that Amanda is the daughter of a major businessman involved in investment funds and real estate. She studied in Europe, spoke a little Italian though, at the level of ciao, come stai, and now returned to New York, worked for a charitable foundation that helped schools for children from low-income areas. That is, yes, she was, from the very top, that I could only read about in the newspapers. And at the same time, she is incredibly easy to communicate with a spark of humor and a keen interest in people. As the event ended, Amanda approached me again and suggested, "Lorenzo, let's have dinner sometime. I would love to hear about your life in Italy, and you can tell me about how you started your business here in New York." I was confused, but nodded, trying to act casual. We exchanged phone numbers. To be honest, everything turned upside down inside me. I was in a pleasant shock. After all, I, a simple guy from Tuscany, am far from a multimillionaire, and although my restaurant is nice, it is not some kind of super prestigious one. And she is the daughter of a famous business tycoon. But it didn't seem to bother her at all. She cared about who I really was. This is how our first, albeit brief, acquaintance took place. That night, returning to my small apartment, I could not sleep for a long time, remembering her voice, her smile, and that soft light in her eyes when she took my business card. It seemed to me that the whole of New York had become different, warmer, more open, more promising. Usually in big cities, when you meet a girl, it can take many weeks before a second date happens. But Amanda called me the very next day. "Lorenzo, hi. How about dinner?" I was both happy and embarrassed. I invited her to meet at my restaurant. They say it's the easiest way, and I'll show her La Dolce Vita. After all, she only tried appetizers. But Amanda replied, "Can I have something else? I want this evening to be more than just a work meeting. And in your restaurant, you will be in the role of the owner, and all your attention will go to the employees, clients." Okay, then let's choose some neutral place. We ended up going to a cozy French restaurant on the Upper East Side. I remember I was worried. I booked a table, arrived there half an hour early to make sure that everything was up to the standard. After all, if a woman of this status offers to go out to dinner, you must not lose face. Although deep down I understood, Amanda is not one of those who would evaluate a restaurant by the price of tablecloths. But I still wanted to do everything perfectly. When Amanda appeared at the door, I think I stopped breathing for a few seconds. A black dress, a neat bun of blonde hair, only a few loose strands framing her face. I stood up to greet her, and we hugged, a little restrainedly as in American traditions, although even then I wanted to take her hand and feel her warmth. The evening passed as if we were old friends, only we suddenly realized that something more was breaking out between us. We talked about everything, about my childhood in Tuscany, about her studies in London, about how she is interested in modern sculpture, and how in the future she wants her foundation not only to help children, but also to develop cultural programs in disadvantaged areas of the city. I talked about how scared I was to move to America, how I faced a language barrier and poverty, how I struggled to make ends meet. And all this time, Amanda listened to me with genuine interest, asked questions, and then told stories from her life, how her father sent her to a boarding school when she was only 12 so that she could learn to be independent, how she sometimes lacked warmth despite the enormous wealth of her family. "You know, Lorenzo," she said at one point, leaning towards me, "many people think that if you grow up in a family of millionaires, then you don't have any problems. But that's not true. Wealth gives opportunities, but takes away time and intimacy. My father is always on the road. He and my mother divorced when I was 17. So sometimes I feel lonely, oddly enough." I saw sadness in her eyes. I wanted to hug her, console her, say, "With me, you won't be lonely. I will do everything to make you smile every day." But we're only on our first real date. However, the feeling that our souls were striving for each other was already hovering between us. We talked all evening and didn't notice how the restaurant was empty. This dinner was followed by others. We walked through Central Park, went to a cafe, where we just got coffee and dessert. We tried street food. Amanda once insisted on buying a hot dog from a street stall, saying, "You have to live for real." It seemed surprising to me that such a girl was not shy about simple joys. One day I suggested that she go to the sea, to one of the New York beaches, for a walk. She agreed. We walked barefoot on the sand, holding hands and laughing. I felt so at ease with her as I had never felt with anyone before. Not everything was rosy, of course. The first time we really encountered a difference in status was at one dinner where her father, Mr. Marshall, was present. I went there because Amanda said, "Dad wants to meet you. He heard about what a talented restaurateur you are." The meeting took place in an expensive club restaurant, where you just can't get in without a membership card. Naturally, I felt awkward. Amanda's father is a tall man with black, slightly gray hair and cold, attentive eyes. He shook my hand, appreciated my suit, my look, and my manner of speaking. Then he asked a bunch of questions about my business, how I was going to develop, and whether I planned to attract investors. I answered honestly that I still have a small but stable business, and I am proud of our level of service. At some point, I noticed that he was looking at me, as if trying to understand whether I was after his money or the status of his daughter. By the end of dinner, I felt that Mr. Marshall was not happy with me. He didn't say anything directly, but I saw his lips tighten when Amanda smiled at me or took my hand. Anxiety rose within me. What if he forbade her to communicate with me? After all, it is obvious that he is a mega influential person. But Amanda seemed unaware of this tension or deliberately ignored it. Over time, we became more and more convinced that we wanted to be together. Our attraction was stronger than any social differences. Sometimes I would pick her up after work at La Dolce Vita, and we would close the restaurant later than usual because we couldn't stop talking. Or she would come to me during the day when I was shopping, and we would go to the markets together, choosing vegetables and fruits. She curiously learned everything about my suppliers, about how the kitchen in the restaurant works. "Lorenzo, you teach me a lot," she said one day when we were choosing fresh fish for the evening menu. I always thought that such things were not for me, that I had the resources that allowed me to simply buy everything ready-made, but you show how much work is put into every detail. At such moments, I felt that there was not just flirting between us, but a deep emotional connection. Yes, we had different starting conditions in life, but our views on how to treat people, how important sincerity is, how valuable every little thing is, these views coincided. Gradually, I began to understand that this was not a fleeting crush. This is something much more serious, a love that grows between us despite conventions. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night, looked at the phone, hoping to see a message from her. And when I found her, "Good night, my amore," my heart melted. When I decided to propose to Amanda, I was both scared and happy. I understood that her family were people of a different circle, and most likely, Mr. Marshall might not be delighted with the idea of his only daughter marrying an immigrant restaurateur. But love doesn't ask about status. In addition, Amanda herself has made it clear more than once. For her, our relationship is more than a passion. A week before the decisive step, I invited her to our restaurant, but not as usual. I specifically asked my staff to leave early and closed La Dolce Vita for a private dinner that evening. I tried to do everything beautifully. I placed candles around the room, put on quiet music, prepared her favorite dishes, pasta with sun-dried tomato sauce and basil, tender macaroons for dessert. Amanda smiled as she entered. "What's going on, Lorenzo? Why so solemn?" "Because today is a special evening," I answered, feeling my heart pounding. We sat down at the table. I poured us glasses of red Tuscan wine, the same one from my Uncle Antonio's winery. Amanda took a sip and said, "I love this wine. It reminds me of you. Delicate, but with depth of flavor." I laughed. She knew how to give compliments, from which I immediately lost all confidence. When we finished the main course, I decided it was time. He took a small velvet case from his pocket and, standing up, said, "Amanda, I don't know how it's done correctly in your family, and maybe I'm not the most suitable candidate in your father's opinion, but I love you, and I want to live with you all my life. Will you marry me?" I handed her the ring. My hands were shaking a little. I saw tears of joy in Amanda's eyes. She stood up and hugged me tightly. Then, pulling away a little, she whispered, "Yes, I agree, Lorenzo." "Yes," we kissed, forgetting about everything. I didn't expect any other answer, but hearing it was still an incredible happiness. We were going to have the wedding in a few months to have time to organize everything. But Mr. Marshall, of course, found out about our plans almost immediately. Amanda told him literally the next day. I already suspected that Amanda's father might not be too happy about this news. Nevertheless, I was preparing for a conversation with him, hoping that maybe he would see how much we loved each other and soften. He invited me to his office. It was located somewhere on the 50th floor of one of the skyscrapers in the center of Manhattan. For the first time, I found myself in such an office. Panoramic windows, a table made of expensive wood, paintings on the walls. Mr. Marshall, with a businesslike air, invited me to sit down. I noticed that he had a dossier on his desk. Perhaps it was some kind of report on my past. In large corporations, they like to check everything, and they probably checked me down to the smallest detail. "Lorenzo," he began, "Amanda said that you are going to get married." "Yes, sir. I understand you may not approve, but we love each other. Love is wonderful, he said, looking me straight in the eyes. But given the difference in our situation, I would like you to sign a marriage contract. I swallowed. Of course, I knew about the existence of such contracts, especially among rich people. But I didn't even think that he would be forced to sign me. I don't have a multimillion-dollar fortune. On the contrary, it was Amanda who would marry a simple guy. However, Mr. Marshall was clearly concerned about protecting the inheritance. He looked at the documents on the table and added, "The contract will state that in the event of a divorce, you will not claim the assets of the Marshall family. At the same time, Amanda, of course, retains all her rights to the inheritance." I sat silently for a few seconds, trying to figure out how to react. On the one hand, it was humiliating, as if he suspected that I was getting married for money. On the other hand, I really didn't need other people's capital. I have my own path, albeit a modest one. Amanda's father apparently read my thoughts in my face. "Nothing personal, Lorenzo. You must understand me. Amanda is my only daughter, and I do not want anyone, even an honest and good person, to have access to her share in the family business. You can say no, but then I will insist that Amanda take her time with marriage." I understood that the pressure was enormous, but the thought of losing Amanda seemed unbearable. So I answered firmly, "Fine, I'll sign. I'm not marrying your daughter for money. All that matters to me is our love." Mr. Marshall smiled slightly at the corner of his mouth. He extended his hand to me for a handshake. Perhaps at that moment he respected me a little for the first time. All that remained was to organize the wedding. Amanda wanted it to be somewhere between a luxurious ceremony and an intimate family celebration. We chose a country estate near New York, surrounded by gardens and vineyards. A spacious green lawn, an old European-style mansion. It was reminiscent of Italian villas, and I felt almost at home there. While preparations were underway, I signed the marriage contract in the lawyer's office. Amanda, as soon as she found out about this, began to apologize. "Lorenzo, I'm sorry," Dad insisted. "I didn't want to." I reassured her. "Don't worry, my love. I understand everything. It's just a piece of paper that doesn't change anything between us." However, the difference in our worlds also manifested itself in other ways. Amanda's dress cost more money than I could have ever imagined. She was helped to choose by her mother, who flew from Europe especially for this event. For me, it all seemed like a luxury, but Amanda smiled and said, "But I will be the most beautiful bride. This is my personal contribution." I just nodded, realizing that there was no point in arguing with her. And I admit, I was pleased to see how happy she was during the preparation process. We also discussed the menu. Naturally, I wanted to create an Italian table, combining classic dishes and local products. Amanda's parents wanted to be sure to include expensive seafood and gourmet delicacies from French chefs. We quickly found a compromise. We had Italian appetizers and wine, French desserts and champagne, and American steaks. The result was a multinational bouquet of flavors as a symbol of the fact that our wedding united several cultures at once. When that day came, I woke up early in the morning in a tiny hotel room not far from the estate. I had no time for sleep. Excitement, joy, anxiety, everything was mixed up. I remembered my father, imagined how happy he would be to know that his son had connected his life with a girl who was not only beautiful, but also shared my values. I wanted him to stand next to me that day, but fate decreed otherwise. I said quietly, "Dad, I hope you look down on me and bless me." By lunchtime, I was already at the estate. I was wearing a classic black tuxedo, white shirt, and bow tie. Several Italian friends who flew in from their homeland helped me morally. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. You meet your bride, everything will go like clockwork." I was more nervous than ever. The ceremony took place in the courtyard of the mansion. An arch decorated with white roses was displayed against a backdrop of neatly trimmed lawns and flowering trees. There were a lot of guests, from Amanda's side representatives of elite families, her father's business partners, and just her friends from charitable circles. With me, not so much, but my mother came from Italy, whom I had not seen for almost a year. When she saw me in a tuxedo, she burst into tears of happiness and hugged me for a long time, whispering that she was proud of me. I was deeply touched. The violin sounded, and then the moment came when Amanda walked out to the arch on the arm of her father. I think I forgot how to breathe for a split second. She was wearing a white satin dress with a long veil, truly gorgeous. As she approached, our eyes met, and I realized that the entire world around me had disappeared. Just the two of us and our love. The official part was short, vows to each other in English and Italian. When they said, "You may kiss the bride," we both smiled and the guests clapped happily. Then the party began. Music, dancing, lots of food, wine, toasts. I, of course, gave my acceptance speech, mentioning how it all started from a small Tuscan kitchen, my father's dream and faith in my business. To our surprise, Mr. Marshall also said a few warm words to us and wished us happiness. Maybe he already realized that he couldn't separate us and now preferred to at least support his daughter. By the end of the evening, we were full of emotions. We danced in the open area, laughed, and took pictures with everyone. As the guests began to leave, Amanda and I were finally alone in the garden under the starry sky. She pressed herself close to me and whispered, "Now we are one, Lorenzo." I replied, "And we will remain united, no matter what happens." We kissed, and it was the most tender kiss of my life. After the wedding, we flew to Italy for a short honeymoon. It was my idea. Amanda initially wanted Bali or the Maldives, but I persuaded her that first we should visit my homeland, get to know my roots better. We chose a quiet town on the Amalfi Coast. It's sunny, romantic, and you can relax while enjoying the sea and Italian cuisine. 2 weeks passed in an atmosphere of absolute happiness. We walked along narrow streets, ate pizza in tiny family restaurants, drank limoncello, and sat on the balcony overlooking the sea. In the evenings, we merged in passionate embraces, as if we were afraid to miss even a moment of each other. This honeymoon was a real fairy tale for us. But when we returned to New York, we were faced with the reality that I had to get back to work at La Dolce Vita, and Amanda continued to work at the charity. We both had a lot of worries. Sometimes our schedules don't coincide, and we saw each other less often than we would like. But this was the beauty of family life. We learned to appreciate every minute together. They say that the first year of marriage is one of the most difficult because spouses get used to each other's everyday life, habits, and details that they had not noticed before. But everything worked out surprisingly harmoniously for us. Maybe the fact is that we are both people of compromise by nature. We know how to listen. Or maybe because we were truly in love. We rented a spacious apartment closer to Manhattan. Amanda insisted on this, and I agreed, since she often had meetings in the center at work, and it was not so difficult for me to get to the restaurant. We furnished it together. She brought some of her rich furniture. I added Italian flavor paintings with views of Tuscany, kitchen utensils that were passed down in my family. In the mornings, we had breakfast together if our schedule allowed. I often surprised Amanda with Italian breakfasts, fresh croissants, espresso brewed in a mocha pot, sometimes an omelet with sun-dried tomatoes and cheese. She laughed, "I'll get fat with you, Lorenzo," but she ate it all with pleasure. In response, she bought flowers, decorated the house, and gave it a special coziness. Amanda took a genuine interest in my affairs. She often asked how sales were going, what development plans I had, and whether I needed her help. At first, I thought that I would do everything myself, because my pride did not allow me to ask for her financial support. But she quickly explained, "Lorenzo, I'm not going to just give you money, but I have connections. I can help find potential partners, clients, and put you on the list of events that we organize. This is a purely business cooperation, and I want your restaurant to become recognizable outside our area." I was grateful to her for this. At some point, she introduced me to a couple of influential people in the hotel industry, and we struck an agreement whereby their hotels began recommending our restaurant to guests looking for authentic Italian cuisine. In return, I gave them discounts and arranged for snacks to be delivered to their buffets. This greatly expanded La Dolce Vita's customer base. But with all this, we made sure that our joint activities did not turn us into pure business partners. We agreed, at work we are colleagues and assistants, and at home we are loving spouses. In the evenings, Amanda sat on my lap and, laughing, said, "Well, we'll make contracts later, but now I want to feel my husband next to me." And we plunged into embraces full of passion. The passion between us did not fade, but only seemed to flare up even stronger. We tried to squeeze in dates, even in our daily routine. Once we booked a private table on the roof of a skyscraper. There was a restaurant with Michelin stars. A bit pricey, sure, but Amanda said, "We have to treat ourselves sometimes, right?" Another time, I cooked dinner right at home, closed the curtains, put on Frank Sinatra music, and lit candles. We danced right in the kitchen, laughing and spinning with each other. I already understood. Happiness is not necessarily purchasing tickets to the Maldives, but the opportunity to be with your loved one, doing the simplest things. Of course, our first year of marriage was not ideal in every way. We sometimes quarreled, sometimes over trifles. She reproached me for staying too long in the restaurant. I answered that otherwise the business would not work. Or I would grumble that she spends too much money on designer clothes, and she would laugh it off. What kind of wife would I be if I didn't have fashionable dresses? But all our quarrels quickly dissipated as soon as we hugged and said, "I'm sorry." Amanda also supported me in not feeling unworthy of her family. She herself insisted that we have lunch with her father once every 2 weeks and invited him to my restaurant several times. Gradually, a kind of neutrality was established between Mr. Marshall and myself. He saw that Amanda was happy and that I was actually working and not trying to take advantage of her position. I think this calmed him down somewhat. Time passed, and at a certain point we began to talk more and more often about the future, about whether we wanted children, where we planned to live in the long term. Amanda expressed the idea of buying a house outside the city, where she could start a garden and go there on weekends. I myself often thought about opening a second La Dolce Vita location or buying a larger premises, but we decided not to rush. They told themselves, "Enjoy what you have, don't forget to live in the moment." This first year of ours was saturated with emotions, from overwhelming love and passionate nights to small family troubles, from joint projects to romantic escapes to each other from everyday troubles. And at the end of each day, falling asleep, I felt her hand on my chest and thought, this is it, real happiness, when there is someone who loves and understands you, despite any differences. Of course, life never stops at, and they lived happily ever after. There are always new challenges beyond the fairy tale. In the second half of our first year of marriage, Amanda had difficulties at work. Her foundation encountered unscrupulous contractors, and a small scandal broke out in the press. Amanda was very worried because reputation is everything for a charitable foundation. I tried to support her morally, reminding her that she is an honest and transparent person, and this will ultimately prevail. There were also problems at La Dolce Vita. My chef unexpectedly left, and I was left without the main specialist in the kitchen. I had to urgently look for a replacement, temporarily stand at the stove myself, and control the process. At the same time, I worked with papers and was involved in promotion. Towards the end of the first year of marriage, we began to talk more and more often about children. Amanda said, "I want a little girl with your eyes and my hair," and I laughed. "And I want a boy with your smile and my sense of humor." While these were more like dreams, we decided to take our time and give ourselves time to strengthen our careers. But the very fact that such conversations took place indicated that we were looking in the same direction. We also discussed the option of buying a small house outside the city where we could have Italian picnics on weekends and invite family and friends. Amanda cautiously suggested, "Dad can give us a loan on favorable terms." I shook my head. "Thank you, but I'd rather do it myself." Just recently, maybe 6 months ago, I thought that everything was perfect with Amanda. We lived the first year of marriage with almost cloudless happiness, coped with the difficulties that arose together, and supported each other. It would seem that right now the time should have come for even greater harmony and comfort. But sometimes life suddenly changes course. It's as if she throws a network of small, almost imperceptible signals at you, alarm bells that at first seem like accidents, but over time add up to an ominous picture. The first such call for me was Amanda's banal busyness. She was always a business person and at the same time quite flexible. If she suddenly had some kind of night event at the foundation or late meetings with potential sponsors, she would definitely inform me in advance. We agreed on when I could pick her up, or at least I prepared dinner at home for her arrival, albeit late. But in recent months, situations have become increasingly repeated when Amanda wrote only a short SMS without details. "I'm delayed at work. Don't wait, go to bed." Or she would come after midnight, citing the need to urgently meet with one very important person. At the same time, she looked tired, but not physically, rather mentally, as if something was tormenting her. At first, I tried to be understanding about this. Big city, serious work. I myself also sometimes sat at the La Dolce Vita restaurant until late at night, keeping track of accounting reports or meeting with potential investors. But what bothered me was that Amanda stopped sharing details about her employment. She used to say, "Today we discussed a new project with a company that wants to fund a campaign for immigrant children," or "There was a philanthropist at the dinner. He is a fan of Italian cuisine. I should introduce you sometime." Now all her explanations boiled down to, "There was just a lot to do. It's pretty boring. I don't think it's worth going into details." The second signal was her phone. I noticed that she began to carry it with her all the time. Sometimes she even took it into the shower. At home, this was not a problem before. We kept our smartphones on the charger or on the nightstand by the bed, without particularly protecting them with passwords or fingerprints. I knew her code, just as she knew mine, and we did not hide anything fundamental after all. We had nothing to hide. But now she has changed the password. I noticed this when one day I was just going to check if she had received an important letter. She herself asked me to follow the messages if the courier suddenly called. And suddenly it turns out that the password I knew doesn't work. Amanda just shrugged. "Oh, I changed it a long time ago. I forgot to say. Don't worry, I did it for safety." Then there were minor reservations and contradictions in her words. For example, she says that she was at a meeting with her colleague from a charitable foundation, and the next day she mentions the name of a completely different person with whom she allegedly had the same meeting. Such inconsistencies made my heart clench, as if someone was invisibly stabbing it with a needle. An inner voice whispered, "Lorenzo, something is wrong here." But you want to believe in the best, right? I want to justify my loved one, to find a logical explanation. I tried to do this. Sometimes he even scolded himself. "I've become too suspicious. You know Amanda. She's not the type to betray." And yet, an uncomfortable doubt lingered in my head. And doubt is like a weed. If you don't pull it out in time, it will take root and begin to poison the entire field of your soul. I tried to drown out these thoughts with routine, work, evening plans, but the more distracted I was, the brighter the internal anxieties became. The third warning sign was the behavior of Mr. Marshall, Amanda's father. At first I was glad that we had established more or less normal relations. He saw that my restaurant was running successfully and sometimes even began to consult with me about Italian wine supplies or invite me to business buffets, where I could expand my connections. But around the same time, when Amanda began to return late, I noticed that Mr. Marshall was also making some caustic hints to me when they met. For example, we were having dinner together, and he suddenly, in passing, said, "Lorenzo, young man, you believe that trust is important in marriage, but sometimes trust can make us blind to reality." I didn't attach any significance to these words right away, but they stuck in my consciousness. Why did he say this? It seems that we were talking about a completely different topic about the situation in the real estate market. Why insert the phrase about blind trust? Perhaps I just thought it was a hint. But then, unfortunately, he sounded too prophetic. At such moments, I looked at Amanda and tried to look for the answer in her eyes. But she turned away or pretended to be chatting with someone on the phone. I understood. Something was happening between us. an invisible wall that I can't seem to overcome with open conversation. Maybe I should talk to her directly, I asked myself. But then I remembered how the previous times, when I tried to start a topic about her late returns, Amanda began to get annoyed, saying that I was jealous of her for no reason. And in the end, I left it. We didn't want to quarrel, until something happened that finally convinced me that it wasn't just a matter of late work or boring details. One afternoon, while in a restaurant, I saw one of Amanda's friends, her colleague at the foundation, approach the door. I was happy. I thought she came in for a snack. But she was clearly excited. Her eyes were darting. Her face was tense. She called me aside and said, "Lorenzo, I didn't want to interfere, but I think you should take a closer look at who Amanda spends her evenings with." Everything is far from what she says. I was dumbfounded. The colleague blushed and fell silent. She only said, "Sorry, I can't say anything more, but I'm worried about both her and you." And without letting me ask any questions, she left the restaurant. I looked after her, and only her last words sounded in my head. "Take a closer look. Everything is far from so." At that moment, my alarm bells became a real alarm bell. I realized that if I don't find out the truth now, it will only get worse. My heart was beating at the speed of a locomotive, and I decided it's time to stop being naive. It's time to figure out what's going on. It sounds loud, detective. In fact, of course, I'm not much of a detective. I worked in restaurants all my life and then built a business where transparency and openness are important. But I didn't see any other way. It was necessary to check what, where, and with whom my wife does in the evenings, why she doesn't return home on time, and whether there is some terrible secret hidden behind her words. At first, I tried to find out something through mutual friends, but it turned out that the majority were simply not aware. Those who suspected something averted their eyes, clearly not wanting to get involved. I understood. City gossip could only do harm, and I wouldn't get any specifics. Besides, I didn't want to wash dirty linen in public among people who could then turn everything into hype and rumors. Then I went a different route. I hired a private detective. Yes, it sounds crazy to spy on your own wife, but I didn't see any other way. I found out about this man through businessmen acquaintances. They say he helped them in checking the loyalty of employees. The detective, Mr. Morgan, turned out to be a dry-looking man of about 50, with a wrinkled face, wearing a classic suit. He asked, "What exactly is the matter?" And I, burning with shame, told him that I suspected Amanda of treason, or at least of some dubious matters. "Treason?" Morgan asked. "Or maybe we are talking about financial fraud. You said that she is the daughter of a big businessman. Sometimes people hide not a love affair, but participation in gray schemes." "I don't know," I admitted, feeling how everything was shrinking inside. Maybe she really did pull something off. But I'm afraid the truth is even worse. The detective nodded. "Understand. I will check everything as carefully as possible. No publicity, everything is confidential." He asked me to provide information, where Amanda goes approximately, the license plate of her car, contacts of people with whom she works. I gave him everything I could. He also named the days and hours when she is most often delayed. Morgan asked for an advance payment and said that if evidence emerged, he would report it. The waiting was the hardest. I felt like I was betraying Amanda, prying into her personal life, breaking trust. But then I remembered the words of Amanda's colleague. It's not what she says, and Amanda's changed facial expressions in recent months. Yes, I must find out what lies behind her secret. There were no results during the first week. Amanda lived her own life. I did not know whether the detective was following her or not. He did not report details. He only said, "We continue to monitor." Every evening, I nervously looked at the clock, waiting for her to return. Sometimes she would come in as usual, around 8 or 9, and act relatively normally, except for being irritable. Sometimes she stayed until closer to midnight, making excuses about urgent matters. It seemed to me that my heart was simply breaking from the unknown. Finally, the second week, Morgan called me around 6 p.m. I was just at the restaurant, helping in the kitchen, as the chef had a force majeure situation with supplies. Hearing the bell, I tore off my gloves and ran to the office. At the other end of the line, the detective said, "Looks like we have something to talk about. Meet me tomorrow. I have some photos and data." His voice was calm and businesslike, but everything inside me sank. Tomorrow? How will I get through the night knowing he's discovered something? After digesting this, I realized. Can we meet today? Okay, let's go. Don't change anything in your routine. As soon as you can, come to the address. He named a cafe, which was located at the other end of the city. I realized that Amanda was going to be late again, so I could get out after closing. And that day, I barely survived until 11 in the evening, when the restaurant was empty. I was shaking with fear as if I was waiting for a death sentence. In a half-empty cafe, Detective Morgan sat at a table by the window. There was a small folder in front of him. When I approached, he motioned for me to sit down. No emotion was visible on his face. "I'll get straight to the point," Morgan began, rummaging through the folder and pulling out several photographs. "Here, these are pictures taken 3 days ago and the day before yesterday. Your wife left work and got into a black SUV. I looked at the photo and recognized Amanda. She did get into the car, but the driver's face was not visible in the photo. The next shots were even more eloquent. In one of the shots, Amanda was leaving the Plaza Royale Hotel arm in arm with a man. I could see the back of his head and shoulder. The photo captured them holding hands. Everything inside me flared up. I tried to look at the man, but the shooting angle was such that it was impossible to recognize his face. We found out who owns the SUV. His name is Richard DuPont, and he is Mr. Marshall's longtime business partner. The same DuPont who, if I'm not mistaken, is involved in your wife's investment fund, Morgan explained. In addition, we have a printout of her telephone contacts for the last 2 months. There is clearly regular communication with a subscriber registered to Mr. DuPont's assistant. But judging by the context, this is more likely the phone of DuPont himself, simply designed for conspiracy. I didn't believe my ears and eyes. DuPont is Amanda's father's business partner. I saw him a couple of times at social events. He is a man of about 45, stately, with gray hair at the temples, always wearing an expensive watch and suits. Is Amanda. With him, my mind refused to accept this. But the facts were obvious: the hotel, joint late meetings, a secret telephone. "Are you saying that my wife is cheating on me with this DuPont?" I said with difficulty, feeling my throat drying up. The detective sighed and pulled out another photo. "Here, look. It's last night. They leave the restaurant and hug. I know the picture is not very clear, but it is quite possible to distinguish their faces. In this photo, Amanda leaned her head on the man's shoulder, laughing, and it was clear from her gaze that this was not a friendly relationship. For a split second, my vision went dark. I just wanted to run out into the street and scream. How could she? Why? The feeling of burning resentment overflowed, but I continued to listen to the detective. He said that Amanda and DuPont had been dating, apparently, for at least a month. But what's interesting is that their communication takes place not only in a love scenario. According to Morgan, DuPont was involved in some complex schemes using the name of the Amanda Foundation. Perhaps Amanda knows, or what was even worse for me at that moment, she herself is participating in fraud along with this guy. The detective admitted that he does not yet have direct evidence of financial fraud, but the circumstances indicate a very ambiguous connection. "I will continue the investigation if you want to find out everything to the end," Morgan said, collecting the photos back into the folder. "I understand that the news is unpleasant, but you must have the full picture." I nodded, unable to speak. I was torn apart from the inside. I sat in this dimly lit cafe, listened to the noise of cars outside the windows, and felt that my life was going downhill. A real shock. My wife, whom I loved more than life itself, and her secret affair with DuPont. I remembered Mr. Marshall's words about blind trust and almost crushed the glass of water in my hand. When the detective left, I remained sitting at the table for another 15 minutes, trying to collect my thoughts. I wanted to call Amanda, demand an explanation, scream, throw out the pain. But at the last moment, I restrained myself. My instinct told me not to act rashly. We need to understand the motives. Maybe this is some kind of game against her father. Or, damn. Yes, my mind rebelled, refusing to believe that she was just having an affair. But the pictures don't lie. That night, I returned home close to 1 o'clock. Amanda was already asleep, or pretending to be asleep. She lay with her face turned to the wall. I wanted to wake her up, ask her point blank, "What's going on with DuPont?" But the fear of hearing the answer and wild fatigue took over. I lay down, closed my eyes, and darkness covered me. In the morning, Amanda left before me, almost without looking in my direction. I heard her steps along the corridor, the sound of the door closing. I lay there and felt rage bubbling in my chest. Usually, if we got up at the same time, I would make us coffee and we would exchange a few warm words. Now nothing. How dare she? I thought, looking at the ceiling. Isn't she ashamed? Suddenly a thought struck me. What if she doesn't care at all? This made me sick. I got up and took a shower, but the hot water did not stop the internal trembling. At breakfast, I couldn't swallow even a bite. Those photographs with Amanda and DuPont were in front of my eyes. That day, I went to the phone 5 times to call her, but stopped. Either I was afraid that I would scream, or I understood that direct accusations did not yet give me the desired control over the situation. Yes, I had evidence, but maybe I should have collected even more significant material. And yet the main question remains, why? Does she love DuPont? Or is all this for the sake of some kind of business scheme? At such moments, my Italian nature woke up. I wanted to break into DuPont's office and bloody his nose, yell at Amanda, throw her things out of the house. But then I remembered Amanda and I's first year of marriage, all our happy days. I couldn't understand where the love that I felt, and that, as it seemed to me, she also felt, had gone. My soul felt bad, as if I had lost a part of myself. In the evening, when I came to the restaurant, the employees noticed my dejected state and asked, "Is everything okay, boss? You look tired." I got off with a dry answer. I just didn't get enough sleep. They, of course, did not understand that a hurricane was raging inside me. By the end of the day, the pent-up rage literally demanded release. I pretended to go into the back room to check the bills, but in reality I was just standing there, leaning on the cold metal countertop, trying to breathe so as not to break into hysterics. A carousel was spinning in my head. She betrayed me. Amanda is a traitor. But I did not yet have proof that this was precisely betrayal in the love sense or some other strange combination against her father. Although the photographs spoke for themselves, their hugs, holding hands, smiling at each other. I later contacted the detective and said I wanted to get all the information I could. Morgan agreed, warning that it could take a week or two. He needs confirmation, perhaps audio or video recording. One of the nights during that period became a nightmare for me. I could not sleep until the morning, and then I dozed off and had a strange dream. It's as if I'm in Italy, in our old house, seeing my late father. He calls me to him, and Amanda suddenly appears next to me and turns her back to me. The father looks reproachfully. "Why did you let this happen?" I woke up in a cold sweat. My heart was pounding, and my ears were buzzing. It seemed as if life itself was reproaching me. Melancholy mixed with outbursts of anger, and I began to think about revenge. Yes, that terrible word is revenge. But it is worth admitting that everyone who has been betrayed has at least once imagined how he would answer the offender tenfold. I wanted to publicly convict Amanda of her deception, so that everyone could see who is really to blame. I especially wanted to shatter the reputation of DuPont, who apparently considered me a waste of space. But at the same time, I understood. I still do not have a complete understanding of their motives, just naked emotional rage. And the Italian temperament is a dangerous thing. If you don't keep it in check, you can do stupid things. I needed to calm down and think things through. Having collected my thoughts, I decided to act more calmly. After all, my years in New York taught me that to succeed, and even to get justice, you need to be able to think pragmatically and deliberately. Photos and guesses alone are not enough. Yes, I'm already sure that Amanda is deceiving me. But in order to deal them a really painful blow, you need to put everything together. Facts, evidence, a possible fraud scheme if there is one, and most importantly, choose the moment when they can be caught. I remembered how Mr. Marshall loved to demonstrate the integrity of his family, especially his daughter, to the business community. Amanda also values her reputation. She is a responsible person in a charitable foundation, in full view of the press. Her name is mentioned in reports, where every penny must be accountable. If it were revealed that she was involved in shady dealings, or worse, having an affair with her father's partner, it would affect the entire Marshall family, because it would call into question her integrity. And it will hit DuPont's reputation even harder. After all, he occupies a key place in many transactions. I made a decision. Yes, I will do it. If the facts are confirmed, I will do everything to disclose them at the highest level. Around this time, the detective gave me the first results of the wiretap. The recordings were not of very high quality, but in some places you can make out phrases. Amanda said, "I'm afraid that he might guess." DuPont answered something like, "Don't worry, he has no reason. The main thing is that your daddy doesn't understand," and so on. It was difficult to fully understand the context, but enough was heard to understand that they were hiding something important. At the same time, Morgan fished out some financial documents. It turned out that significant sums were withdrawn from the fund managed by Amanda through shell companies associated, oddly enough, with the name of DuPont. I did not fully understand these schemes, but the detective pointed to a direct connection, which, with a detailed audit, would be regarded as a serious violation. And Amanda apparently knows, because she signed some of the paperwork associated with these transactions. When I digested this, the anger in me boiled with renewed vigor. So, not only is she cuckolding me, but she's also stealing from the foundation under the guise of charity. And he does all this with his father's longtime companion. The nastiness of the situation overwhelmed me. Realizing that my suspicions were no longer just a figment of jealousy, but real facts, I began to think about a plan for how and where to strike a crushing blow. A small reason appeared by itself. An important business meeting was to take place in a month, a kind of mini forum for large philanthropic and investment circles. Mr. Marshall is almost always the guest of honor there, and Amanda, as head of the charity, usually gives a speech about her programs. DuPont also often attends such events, since he conducts most of his transactions with foreign funds, and it is important for him to appear socially responsible. I realized this is the perfect moment. If you make a loud statement right where the press, competitors, and investors are, it will be the most painful blow for Amanda and DuPont. But to bring everything to the end, you need irrefutable evidence, photographs, recordings of conversations, financial reports that can be instantly presented to the public, or at least to important people. I contacted Morgan and asked him to prepare a dossier. I wanted everything to be laid out clearly, a chronology of meetings, a list of transactions, audio, and photographic evidence. Naturally, the detective asked for additional payment, and although it was difficult for me, I agreed. I said to myself, this is an investment in my own future, in my sense of justice. I also began to behave deliberately calmly with Amanda so as not to arouse suspicion. She may have believed that my suspicions were allayed, or perhaps she just didn't care. Sometimes we slept in the same bed, saying almost nothing to each other. I waited for the right moment, like a hunter hiding in the bushes. Sometimes I find myself thinking, what if she suddenly explains everything, and it turns out that everything is wrong? What if she fell into DuPont's trap and didn't know how to get out of it? But then I remembered the photographs in which they clearly looked not like a victim and a blackmailer, but rather like lovers. And the pain inside became even sharper, like a knife stuck under the ribs. That very day has come. The business meeting took place at a luxury hotel in Manhattan. The public is mainly people with big money and big names. The lobby was filled with conversations about upcoming projects, charitable initiatives, and new investors. I showed up there around lunchtime, although all the performances started in the morning. I wanted my appearance not to seem like a challenge, but to become an effective denouement. Was I nervous? Yes, yes. Everything was trembling inside. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it in my temples. But I held on. In my hands, I had a neat folder containing screenshots of financial schemes, as well as several key photographs, an extract with the dates and addresses of meetings between Amanda and DuPont. I felt like the hero of a cheap detective story, but I understood that this was the reality of my life now. When I entered the conference room, where the presentations were already taking place, I saw Amanda at the lectern. She talked about new opportunities to support low-income families. Slides flashed on the screen behind reports, statistics, beautiful photographs of beneficiaries. The audience applauded because many knew Amanda as a role model, a young and energetic leader of the foundation. Looking around, I noticed Mr. Marshall sitting next to his business partners, and DuPont sat a little to the side, pretending to listen attentively. He looked confident, wearing an expensive suit and watch, and smiled when Amanda spoke. I walked up to the entrance, next to the rows of chairs, and stopped. Morgan immediately sat down next to me. I asked him to come, and quietly said, "Everything is ready, I'm on hand." I nodded and said, "After her speech, we act." The last minutes of the performance dragged on like an eternity. Amanda spoke with inspiration and played on the emotional strings of the listeners. She spoke about mercy, about transparency, about the need to help honestly and selflessly. I clenched my fists, feeling my insides boil. When she finished, there was applause and someone shouted, "Bravo!" I saw Amanda make a graceful bow and smile, looking at DuPont. And then I walked out into the middle of the hall. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," I said to the audience, "but before we continue, I would like to ask a couple of questions to Mrs. Amanda Marshall D'Angelo." Amanda frowned when she saw me. A bewildered silence hung in the hall. Mr. Marshall looked up and said, "What's going on?" "Lorenzo," Amanda said, trying to look calm, "can we talk later?" "I'm afraid it will be too late later," I replied and pulled out several photographs from the folder. "Dear Present, now you see in front of you a man who runs a charitable foundation and talks about transparency. But here are photos taken over the last couple of months. They show Mrs. Marshall D'Angelo and none other than Richard DuPont, her father's partner, as I move my hand, showing different pictures. These meetings took place in secret, including frequent visits to the same hotel. There was a whisper in the hall. DuPont jumped up, fury in his eyes. Amanda stood at the podium, paler than paper. "What have you done, Lorenzo?" she shouted, trying to maintain her pride, but I saw how her voice trembled. "I made an expose, Amanda, because I'm tired of you making a fool out of me and everyone here. You and Mr. DuPont are not only in a relationship behind my back." I glanced at the audience, where many were already pulling out their phones, filming what was happening. "But you are also carrying out financial fraud through the foundation that you are here presenting as a paragon of virtue. Here," I showed screenshots of the transfers. "Look at these accounts. The money donated by foundations and investors went to shell companies linked to a man named Richard DuPont." The hall became even more noisy. Some people jumped up, trying to see the documents. Mr. Marshall stood up heavily, his face flushed with anger. DuPont shouted something, trying to justify himself, but it was difficult to hear because of the cacophony of voices that had begun. "All this is a lie," Amanda finally shouted above the noise. "Are you crazy, Lorenzo? This is a provocation." I smiled coldly. "Lie? Then how do you explain these photographs? How can you explain the transactions that I can now publish in the media? How do you explain that people saw you in Mr. DuPont's arms?" Then Detective Morgan came forward and showed what looked like a printed estimate, as well as his private investigator license. "There is official confirmation here that my team and I have established the facts of systematic meetings between Mrs. Marshall D'Angelo and Mr. DuPont. We have reports, dated, and certified. So, dear investors and journalists, you can familiarize yourself." The crowd literally rushed to him to see the documents. DuPont, realizing that the situation was getting out of control, tried to shout that, "Everything is wrong, I can explain everything." But it was already too late. A wave of suspicion and indignation overwhelmed him. After all, reputation in these circles is everything. If it now becomes clear that he and Amanda were fraudulently taking money from charitable contributions, they will be finished. I saw how Mr. Marshall looked at his daughter. He was furious, but also confused. It was the first time I had seen him like this. Amanda took a step towards him and wanted to say something, but he pulled back sharply. I approached DuPont, clenched my fists, and I thought that now he would hit him in the face. But he limited himself to muttering, "You are responsible for this." Shouts rang out in the hall. "Shame! How could you? They stole our money." Someone was pointing a phone camera directly at Amanda, her face contorted with horror and shame. She looked around helplessly, as if not believing that all this was happening in reality. It seemed that a little more and she would faint, but not a single person extended a helping hand to her. Even her father stood looking at her with icy malice. I didn't feel as satisfied or elated as I might have expected. Instead, I felt empty inside. Yes, I hit back, seeing how their impeccable image was crumbling, how in horror Amanda realized that everything had been revealed. I thought I would feel triumph. But no, all this rage evaporated, as if leaving only a charred field. People crowded around. There was a commotion all around. I stood back, looking at Amanda, who was no longer even looking in my direction. DuPont tried to get out, said something quickly, but no one listened to him. Mr. Marshall made a sign to someone, apparently his guards, and they quickly approached DuPont. It looks like he wanted to remove him from the hall and sort things out one-on-one. After a couple of minutes, everything turned into chaos. Representatives of the press tried to get comments, investors shouted that they would withdraw money from the fund, and the forum itself was effectively disrupted. I turned and walked towards the exit. Detective Morgan followed me, still holding some of the documents in his hands. "What's next, Lorenzo?" he asked in a low voice. "Further." I stopped for a moment, looked back at the audience, where Amanda stood in the middle of the stage with a dull look. "Then let them deal with the consequences themselves." I did everything I had to do. I felt a strange sensation pierce my soul, a mixture of relief and immense sadness. Yes, I took revenge. Yes, I humiliated her in front of everyone, and perhaps this is what Amanda deserved for her betrayal. But why does it hurt me so much? Because love has not yet been completely burned out, but has only turned into ruins. Thus ended my plan to expose. I didn't expect everything to be so loud and revealing, but I couldn't do it any other way. The wound was too deep and their deception too insidious. I went out into the street, no longer the same person I was when I entered there. Rain drizzled from low gray clouds, and I walked without opening my umbrella, letting the cold drops run down my hair and face. Thoughts were pounding in my head. What now? Will I continue to live in New York? What will happen to the restaurant? What about my relationship with the Marshall family? Or maybe it's worth going back to Italy. There were no answers, just the understanding that another chapter of my life has closed, and that the taste of bitterness of betrayal and devastation remained in her. I could not foresee how quickly our family drama would end. That huge scandal that happened at a business meeting seemed to light a fuse, and my whole life around me flared up and then burned to the ground. Every step, every connection, and every illusion about a bright future with Amanda, everything collapsed overnight. When the roar in the hall died down and the reporters, grabbing the hottest comments, rushed to the editorial office, I still had those ill-fated folders with evidence of her betrayal in my hands. I remember standing at the exit of the hotel. A light rain was falling, and my hand involuntarily squeezed these papers. It seemed to me that I still had not let go of the past and did not fully understand what I had just achieved. There was an empty celebration inside. You know, this is when you seem to have achieved what you wanted. You took revenge on the offenders, tore off their masks, but instead of joy, you only feel a gaping wound in your soul. I looked at the cars speeding through Manhattan and thought, well, now I have freedom. No illusions, no more false love, no more playing at being a happy couple. And at the same time, it was bitter and cold inside. However, life did not stop with this scandal. Soon the formal divorce proceedings began. On the one hand, everything went so quickly and insensitively that I had no doubt. The very points of the marriage contract that Amanda had once forced me to sign played a decisive role. It turned out that, to some extent, I was even happy with this contract. I once perceived it as humiliation. Now I realize that it was thanks to him that we were able to scatter without unnecessary litigation. All legal details were simplified to banal formalities. She did not demand property because, according to the marriage contract, I could not lay claim to her family's finances and she could not claim mine. We simply signed papers admitting that we no longer wanted to be together, and the lawyers filed for divorce. Amanda, as I understand it, had more serious problems related to reputation and financial fraud in her foundation. Her father, Mr. Marshall, was seething with rage. It was rumored that he gave her a real dressing down, and then abruptly cut off her position in the charity in order to save at least some part of his family from complete disgrace. But I know little about all the details, and I admit I didn't want to get involved. As soon as it became clear that we were disagreeing, I did everything possible to complete this matter without unnecessary intersections and scandals. Oddly enough, Mr. Marshall himself wanted this no less, because the scandal had already taken on large proportions. Less than a month had passed from the moment of our conflict to the execution of legal papers. I, a 35-year-old guy who got a girl from high society as my wife, lost her and everything that existed between us in a matter of weeks. Sometimes, waking up at night, I thought, did all this really happen? How quickly love turns to dust if you don't know at what price it is bought. I officially became a free man. Every day, coming to the La Dolce Vita restaurant, I reminded myself, now everything is only for you and for your sake. But before I put my soul into the restaurant, I tried to make people feel a warm, family atmosphere in our establishment, but now a completely different tone sounded in me. I felt myself becoming colder, harsher. Those who worked with me noticed a change. I no longer laughed with the old ease, no longer experienced naive delight at new guests, but looked at the world through the prism. What can you give me, and how can I use it? It didn't happen overnight, but day by day, I saw my heart seem to freeze behind an ice wall. I was once a person who believed in sincerity, in the power of family, in love that can overcome all differences. Now, every new meeting with a supplier, with a partner, with a potential girlfriend was perceived by me through the prism of benefits or potential risks. I looked at people and thought, will they betray me like Amanda? What is their hidden interest? If we talk about the material side, the restaurant flourished. It's strange, but it was during the period of my petrification that the business took off. I became more aggressive in extracting terms from suppliers, spoke more strictly with doubtful investors, and made a more aggressive advertising campaign, negotiating with influential people in the industry. Where before I would have been embarrassed to push myself into leading roles, now I acted without a shadow of embarrassment. He held private dinners for wealthy clients and organized exclusive tastings of expensive wines. And people who felt the tight grip often agreed, because they saw that La Dolce Vita was becoming a popular, trending point on the culinary map of New York. Sometimes I found myself thinking that it would be interesting to know, what happened to Amanda? How did she survive this explosion? But he immediately pushed these questions away from himself. Why do I need them? She left my life, betraying all our vows and dreams. They say Mr. Marshall sent her to a country house, away from the media, to try to heal her reputational injuries. There were rumors that DuPont was being tried for financial fraud, and his business was going badly. Too much evidence surfaced after my exposure. Amanda may also have faced some consequences, but her father tried to hush it up with the help of his lawyers. I don't know the details. I didn't follow. Sometimes people from her former circle tried to question me, to ask what I thought about what happened. I got off with calm, laconic answers. This story is over. I have nothing to say. A year after my divorce, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the warm Italian guy I once was. I saw in front of me a man with a hard look, with folds at his mouth that betrayed internal anxiety and cynicism. And part of me asked, Lorenzo, aren't you scared that you've changed so much? But alas, I saw no other way. My previous romantic attitude and desire to be open to the world brought me only betrayal and pain. Someone would say, well, not everyone is like that. The world is not without good people. Perhaps, but I no longer had the strength to believe that everything could be different. Nevertheless, life does not stand still, and one day at a party with some restaurateur friends, I met an attractive young woman, Katerina. She was from Spain and was organizing events. We quickly agreed on the basis of common interests, good cuisine, wine, and cultural projects. I felt that she had sympathy for me, and I myself, I admit, did not remain indifferent to her energy and ability to conduct business. We started dating. More precisely, we began to spend time together. Sometimes she came to see me at La Dolce Vita with friends, sometimes I came to her events. We flirted, talked a lot about business, and even made small joint plans to advertise our projects. But if Katerina expected something more feelings, romance, then, alas, I could not give it to her. Internally, I was already burned out. He smiled, gave her flowers in public, could even spend the night with her when both understood that this was a mutual desire. But in my soul, I remained at a distance. At the same time, she noticed my coolness. It's interesting to be with you, but it's like you look through me every time, she said one day when we were sitting in her car after dinner. It seems to me that you don't want to let me into your world. I frowned. She hit the nail on the head, and I didn't lie. Perhaps I no longer believe that there is any point in letting someone into my world. 2 years have passed since that big scandal. I was still alone, except for occasional relationships. One evening, after the restaurant closed, I sat in my office and looked out the window. From here, there was a view of Manhattan, a scattering of lights, an endless stream of cars, high-rise buildings that seemed to go into the low clouds. The same Manhattan where I once walked, clutching Amanda's hand, feeling like the hero of a movie about the beautiful life. Now everything was different. Inside there is a cold determination. My gaze slid over the lights of the metropolis, and I realized I had become stronger than ever. An Italian melody was playing quietly in my office, one of those that used to remind me of my childhood in Tuscany. Now this melody sounded as if from distant times, when the sun was shining brighter, the orange trees were blooming, and I believed that love conquers all. I sighed heavily. Maybe someday I'll allow myself to feel something like tenderness again. But now I was not ready, and I probably won't be soon. I rose from my chair and took my last sip of wine. Outside the windows, the eternal city flickered with the lights of skyscrapers. Closing my eyes, I imagined how my father, if he were alive, would look at me. Maybe he would have said, "Son, you have achieved success, but where is your smile? Where is the spark that burns in your dishes and in your eyes?" I wouldn't answer anything, because, protecting myself from new wounds, I was forced to hide everything good, soft and warm behind the armor of cynicism. I turned off the light and left the restaurant. There was a light drizzle outside, just like the day I discovered Amanda's betrayal. Smoothing my hair, I breathed in the humid city air. In the dampness and lights of Manhattan, I felt like a master of the situation, because now I had money, connections, and influential people nearby. My restaurant was considered one of the best in its segment. But was it all worth my sincerity, my ability to love? Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.